Everyone is talking about AI and Web3 at the moment. And to better understand how these new technologies are affecting kids' lives, particularly in the animation space, I'm having a chat today with Shannon George, creative director at Daily Madness Productions, and Andrew Kavanagh, founder of Cavalier Productions. Do you mind just quickly introducing yourselves to me?
Hi, I'm Shannon George. I am like you said, the creative director at Daily Madness, which is a UK and Dublin-based animation studio. And I am an American, but I've been based in Dublin for about 11 years now.
My name is Andrew Kavanagh. I'm the founder of Cavalier Productions, based here in Dublin, Ireland. We're 22 years in business. We're predominantly 2D production house. We create our own IP. We co-produce internationally, and we also do service work.
I want to start off by focusing on generative AI. There's a massive conversation going on right now about AI's role in the creative spaces, crystallized best perhaps by the ongoing SAG-AFTRA strike. And it looks like kids animation is very much a part of this conversation, with new shows like PBS Kids' Lila in the Loop launching next year, a show that will incorporate AI into its production and some of the content it talks about, and Media One's Kids and Family division looking to use the new technology in some of their programming. So I want to start with the opportunities, if that's all right. As animation experts, from what you've seen about AI, do you think there's anything that could be helpful when it comes to producing quality cartoons for kids?
There are opportunities in animation to make it, to have it help us, hopefully. There's a bunch of stuff that I have warning bells going off in my head as well. But for instance, I was talking to a friend who has another friend in the UK who has been using some AI to help with in-betweening animation. And that sounds amazing to me because I think we all know in animation, we're always up against it. You know, our animators, our crew, they're always under a lot of pressure to meet their quotas and to get it done. We don't get a lot of time to do these productions. So if we could utilize AI to do some of the less fun parts of the animation process, do some of the in-betweening, and have our artists concentrate on the more important parts of animation so that there's less stress and less pressure on our crews. I think, when I heard that, I got quite excited about that. I was like, oh, that could be a positive.
What is in-betweening?
I guess at the very basic level, animation it's theater. Your actor needs to strike a pose and get into another pose and move from one mark to another on the stage. And animation is exactly the same. But if we're just relying on those key poses, those key moments, without thinking about what goes on in the transition, it's a little bit like I go from this pose to this pose, but we just do a kind of weird smear to get me from one to the other. It looks really bad. But if you put a bit of a flourish into it, and, you can be very Vincent Price about the whole thing. So in-betweening is a really important part of the process of animation. It's a little bit overlooked at times, but it's definitely something that up until now you can hit a button to do certain things which are very kind of smooth, but to put the acting in, I'd be very curious to see how AI can actually help us to do that.
Andrew, is there anything else, apart from in-betweening, maybe that you feel AI could jump in the animation space and help out with here?
Yeah, it's a super interesting space to be watching at the moment, particularly coming from a traditional background. And, there is definitely going to be benefits. I mean, it's here with us now. We're going to have to roll with this. And I think when you start thinking about it primarily as a tool that's artist assisted or producer assisted, it can, at various junctures in the production process, take some of the drudgery out of it. We only ever see the tip of the iceberg, which is the show or the film that you make. But all of the stuff that's going on below the water, that's hard work. And there are definitely areas within that where some of the pain could be taken out. And that can go from budgeting and scheduling right through to the rendering process. But certainly from a creative standpoint, I understand why people are a little bit jittery about it. But at the same time, can it create efficiencies? Can it speed up certain parts of the process that, take hours and weeks to do? Absolutely it can. And it's just a question of how we as the creators, as the producers, interact with this tool in order to kind of work with it really and make our process a little bit more streamlined.
Is there anything that you could see how this technology changes the visual I guess, aesthetic of cartoons. If you look at some of the tools that are available right now, we talked a bit about this in betweening, but you kind of get that perhaps a sketchy kind of weird, janky look that you sometimes get from AI created videos, which I've noticed some creators are leaning into as a new style. There's stuff like Meta's animation tool where they can bring to life kids' drawings in a way, which is really interesting and potentially exciting. Is there anything like that when you look at this technology, you think, oh, that's something that could evolve in interesting ways moving forward?
The aesthetics, I think, are, as you mentioned, there's definitely going to be ideas coming out of that space because of what it does, the way it corrals us in certain ways. And, just looking at the what Midjourney has done in its various versions over the last year, 18 months, went from having the kind of 9-fingered hand and the weird kind of eye expressions and sort of dystopian look to it to something that's very slick and very smooth. And, from a creative standpoint, you have to kind of look for the errors in. But it's kind of gone a little bit samey in many ways. So when things start to get a bit samey for me anyway, I start to turn off it a bit. I start to get a bit bored with it. It looks too good. It's too slick, but it's kind of more or less the same thing all the time. And I kind of compare it to like what happened with the 150 years ago when photography came in. And up until then, illustrators, their primary job was working for the newspapers, and there'd be a crime and they'd draw it and they'd do a little sketch. They were gone within 20 years, because the photograph became, more accessible, more readily available. And at the same level, the portrait artists who were really skilled in doing these brilliant oil paintings on canvas, almost to photorealistic detail, had that whole world disrupted. And within that same time frame, you had galleries filling with impressionism, with cubism, with dadaism, with all these different isms that came out of that. And would that have happened without photography landing on our doorstep in that way? I doubt it. So is AI going to do something similar for the way we as visual artists today interact with our medium? I think you're right. That can spark new ways of creating and new ways of representing. I suppose is the job of the artist ultimately.
And on the other side of this, obviously you have the visual aesthetic, but then you have all the amazing writing that goes on behind the scenes. Shannon, do you think AI is going to have an effect in that space at all?
Oh, I definitely do think it will. I think that's why AI is with the WGA strike in the States right now. AI is one of the big negotiating points that they're having trouble reaching an agreement on. It's very similar to the strike that happened in 2007, and it was streaming then. Now it's AI that's the new technology that needs to be dealt with. And I think it's right. I don't think there's any point in writers, in us putting our heads in the sand about AI. Like, it's here and it is going to impact our craft as well. And I think we can find ways to use it. I've used ChatGPT to help me come up with a name of a character. I needed the name of an elf, and I was like, I don't know. So I did ask. I asked it, and it came. I'm like, all right, that's not a horrible name. I'll use it. And I didn't end up using it in the end, but it did get me thinking about stuff. But I think writers' big fear is just being completely eliminated. Like having AI completely replace a script writer. And which is why with the WGA, the minimum writer thing is a big part of what they're negotiating for. If there is no minimum writer in the room, there could exist in a few years a writer's room made completely of AI and then one human who has to fix it all, and that's not what we want. So I do think certain protections have to be put into place. But at the same time, let's see where it might be able to help us. Like, could ChatGPT or whatever iteration it is in a few years help us, come up with some pitches or something that's when you're at episode 52, like I think all of us who have been head writers or creators, Andrew included, like you're just like, oh my goodness, like we just need 3 more stories and then we've got this, and it, you get kind of drained by the end of that. So could that be a little back and forth tool that a writer might use? I don't think it's there yet, but I do think it's coming. So, might that be something? And then it goes to a human to actually write it. I'll just be very interested to see what the WGA ends up agreeing to. We're 4 months into this strike, so they're not. It's going to be part of whatever the final agreement is, and I think the whole writers' world is waiting to see what it ends up being, because it will determine a lot for our writerly futures.
It feels like a very big shift could potentially happen, and there are quite big implications based on the end of these strikes, whether that's for the images that are appearing on screen or the writers that are producing it, kind of, back in the writers' rooms. And I am curious to see what agreements are set, because it has taken a long time, and it feels like both sides are very much trying to figure out what the shape of the future of the industry is going to be. So it feels like very big decisions are being made right now, which are going to have repercussions for quite a long time.
I'm not sure if you've heard about this. Just last week or the week before, there was a big copyright case that was decided in the States where AI can't be, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but it was something to the effect of there has to be a human creator involved in something in order for it to be copyrighted. So something created purely through AI, per this ruling in the States, can't be copyrighted. So that's something that, that impacts the studios as well. It isn't just the writers and the artists, like, studios and distributors and everything. They need those kind of protections too. I thought that ruling was very interesting, and it got a lot of headlines in the WGA Twitter feeds that I follow, because that felt like a win.
It's a big decision, and I think if that hadn't fallen down on that side, I think it would have really changed a lot of things. So we've gone through some of the opportunities, I think, when it comes to AI and this kind of Gen AI technology. What worries do you have about this space for the industry as a whole, or it could be for, I guess, the kids who are going to be consuming this content at the end of the day?
One of my things is, AI is learning and scraping all this stuff, and this is from stuff that's been created by other people. So if AI is creating something in writing or some design or something that didn't come out of nothing, someone created that, or someone has created the various pieces of data that are informing what AI is learning. And I think that needs to be explored as to what sort of compensation model or something, because that's that in many cases it's copyrighted material, so they can't just take it. It's a bit of plagiarizing, for lack of a better word. And then another thing is kind of almost like how food gets labeled like GMO or non-GMO. Like, do we need content to be labeled AI or not AI? If it was, I do think perhaps parents, with dealing with especially media for children or something, that they might want to know that. I, as a consumer or as a writer and an artist, I might want to know that. Like, might I be more apt to watch a show that I know was made by humans rather than AI? Same way I maybe don't want to eat genetically modified food, possibly, So I think those were two things that I read about recently this week that kind of encapsulated my worries and kind of stated not a solution for how to fix it, but like something we need to deal with.
Andrew, what about you? What worries do you have?
I mean, I'd echo what Shannon was saying there. I mean, for a number of years now, we've had the algorithm, the boogeyman that's been kind of steering all of our destinies in the creative professions. I mean, that has so much power, in terms of what we get to see in the first place and what remains on air. So, this idea of this piece of code, which is like the all-seeing eye, coupled with AI coming at us, which, many in the creative profession are very jittery about, and being pushed the idea that this will revolutionize, and make everything so much easier and more iterative, which it can do, but not at the expense of, the kind of, the sort of the human element, which needs to be present as well. I think the strike again is like something, it's not just affecting, the writers, it's affecting the actors, the voice actors, the musicians. Everybody can be clones. You can give your image rights away and you can appear in a movie 100 years after your death. It's not a good place for creatives to be, and so many creatives are at that lower end of the socioeconomic wedge, and like, what's going to encourage them to persist with their professions? Where are we going to get the next geniuses of their arts if they're eliminated at, day one. And that's a really bad place for a bad mindset. And that's the strike is really crystallizing this. I think, that this is the time we need to get entrenched in order to make sure that, certain parameters, certain regulations are put in place that protect and enshrine, not just the people who are already in the industry, but anybody who's even thinking about going into the industry at the moment.
Do you think this problem is exacerbated or magnified by the fact that we're talking about kids media specifically in this conversation? A lot of the things you've been talking about, I guess, apply across the board, whether it's the ethics, the transparency, the human decision making. Is there anything about it being kids media that makes it a trickier conversation or adds anything in any way, in your opinion?
If I can jump in here, I mean, look, kids are the biggest critics on the planet, They consume more media than we do. Just look at any 10-year-old and the amount of books they get through in a year compared to an adult who brings like a paperback to the beach or, reads a non-fiction or a how-to. They are taking a lot in. And similarly with what they're watching on TV and what they're watching on streamers, they will move on very quickly if they don't like it. You'll never see anybody change the channel as quickly as a kid if something isn't hitting the mark for them straight away. We have to remember that's our core audience, the world's biggest critics. If it is not top level in terms of writing, in terms of comedy, in terms of performance, in terms of music, they're gone, and like we as creators, and I'll again just to say Shannon and Lindsay and Christina at Daily Madness as well, they put so much thought into this. Because they know that not only are you live by and die by the sword in this profession, it must be the best show you've ever seen, because kids want the best and they deserve the best, right? So we can't abdicate responsibility for that creative sort of mission, to AI or to some sort of a piece of code. It has to be a human piece in that. Because kids will sniff it out otherwise.
Having sat on so many focus groups with kids being harsh critics, they don't pull their punches if they don't like something. Shannon, what do you think about the kind of impact of AI specifically in the kids media space?
I mean, I think Andrew summed it up very well. Kids are brutal when it comes to content, and also I just think that while everything that we've been talking about does apply across the board, because what we do for kids, it does matter a bit more. They're younger. Many of them can't advocate for themselves. Their little brains work differently than ours. They consume content, like Andrew was saying, differently than we do. Just by the very nature that what we make for kids just makes it that much more important that we need to figure out the AI stuff.
Something else that media types have been thinking a lot about recently is the growth of Web3 and its role in media. Animation has been a part of the NFT space in particular for a long time, but we're now starting to see Web3 become more explicitly child-facing. For instance, Time Studios is drawing inspiration from NFTs for a new kid series, and Mimo Studios has created a preschool program with explicit goals to extend into the Web3 space via the Metaverse, NFTs, things like that. What do you both think about this? Does Web3 have a role to play in the development of animation moving forward?
Yeah, I might walk the plank on this one. I'll take a hit. Like Web3, Web 1 was a surprise to me. That'll give you some indication of my age. It's right that we're a little cautious of Web3 and what that means, what the implications of that are, and it's coming and it's here and it's going to affect everybody. But the digital natives of today are kind of already in that, the way they work in communities and Roblox and Minecraft and so on, they're kind of versed in how this is going to work for them, and animation can be and should be a major part of that. And me as a kind of producer, I'm really just thinking about kids are my audience, kids are my consumers. Really, they're already in that space. I need to kind of learn. I need to kind of get on that train and I need to move along with it to understand how they're interacting with each other and how they're going to be engaging with this, web that's going to be kind of touching everybody's lives in a very short space of time. So that's my responsibility as somebody involved in the business of animation, is to try and see and create opportunities. And maybe there's something that, we can add as creatives that, hasn't been thought about by the technologists.
We probably all need to be a bit more versed in it, because it is, I think, perhaps AI is getting much of the hoopla right now, but Web3 is right there parallel with it or just behind it. It's here to stay, and it's just going to keep going from there. So how can we utilize it and find ways for it to help us rather than fighting against it? I don't think fighting against any of these things that we're discussing is going to get us anywhere. So it's about
Definitely.
finding ways to work with it, and in order to make better content and do more things in our fields.
If I could read you one quote, this is from the president of Media One Kids and Family. Animation has to face the challenges of the future because animation has been about transmedia and franchise building from the very beginning of its history. So that's president of Media One. It positions animation right as this kind of vanguard media format that, if we're taking that position, has always been chasing down the next big technological trend. Do we feel like animation, if we take that at face value, like, does animation have this ability to kind of engage with a lot of these new tech trends in an interesting way?
The one thing that's always kind of been denied us as animators is an iterative way of producing content, a quick way of producing content that enables us to do what somebody could do with a puppet, or put a camera on them and they just talk. For us, it's always been longer, harder and more expensive, right? So I think there's definitely opportunity there in terms, and look, kids are using this all the time. They're interacting with avatars on Snapchat. This is their world. They're used to seeing animation happening in real time. We as producers need to kind of recognize that and see how that helps us to access new channels. Because it's that sort of clashing of worlds between gaming and traditional animation that's been happening and been done through the likes of Unreal Engine over the last couple of years, and we see more of that coming through. So I think Julian Bird is right, in that regard, in saying that as animators, we've always had to think in a bit of a 360 4-quadrant way, because it's been a long time since an idea for a TV show has just sold a TV show, right? I mean, it's obviously the most important bit. But at the same time, it's not in your deck, but you still have to have thought about, the consumer products. You still have thought about, all of the different sort of ancillary bits, because even if you're not pitching it directly to an audience, when you get into those kind of like business conversations down the line, you better have an answer. And I think this is no difference. It's like, how do you monetize in the metaverse? All of these new questions that we're likely to be asked, we need to think it out, and we need to have conversations, and we need to talk to people and get an understanding of it.
To finish off the conversation then, I just want to take a little step back. We talked about how new technology like GenAI, how Web3 might shape animations, how they're made, how they're written, kind of maybe even, how kids are going to engaging and consuming with them. What role do you think these animations could play in helping people, young people particularly, understand these new developments?
Like AI is like, I have like my 10-year-old niece or Andrew's 10-year-old son, like AI is just going to be a part of their lives, so I do think it's part of our responsibility as creators of kids media that to make them aware of, defining what AI is for them. And I think is it Lila in the Loop? That's the new series that's going to actually discuss AI, as a thing to make young children aware of it. And aware of the dangers, for lack of a better word, or the pitfalls, or not, because a kid might think that they're talking to a human, but they're actually talking to an AI, and how are they supposed to know the difference, So I do think we have a responsibility through what we create, to actually let kids know what AI is, not unlike, and I'll let Andrew talk about it, but not unlike what Andrew's company Cavalier, and Andrew created the show Alva's World, what it did for like social media and the internet.
I'm not going to let Shannon get away with downplaying her role in Alva's World as well. We previously worked together as a development duo, and Shannon was instrumental in the development of the show and also wrote some of the script. So just giving you a shout out there, Shannon. I won't go into the kind of whole story of that, but there was, when we started out with it, it had come from a place of concern for me as a parent who had not grown up with social media. It hadn't been part of my development. And trying to figure out how to come up with stories where I could engage with my kids on the notions behind, what was going on, the wizard behind the curtain of who was pulling the strings and so on and so forth, but also the way people kind of interacted with each other in a different way online than they do in the real world. So I mean, that was, for me, was the impetus of doing that. But when we actually produced the show, like, it was during COVID, so it was like even more kind of in the crucible, because everything was online. Kids were at home. They were studying online. They were doing school via Zoom. They were, and then we had these location tracking apps coming in, and the way we had to, data was important. Had to be shared in different ways, in order for us to travel in the world, to move around in the world. So it was a very interesting time, and I think since then everything's been accelerated. So whereas Alva kind of caught a moment in what was happening in the development of how children and technology interface, it's been on an exponentially kind of fast track since then. I think COVID as well interrupted the kind of socialization or social development of children in such a way that when we started to see these avatars, as Shannon mentioned, we started to see these things popping up, and of course these avatars have biases. They're owned by private companies, and they're created in that way, and the data, wherever they're getting it, is colored in a certain way by the data set that it's mining from. So it's going to have biases. So we do need to educate, and we need to be, not just educate, I think we need to be kind of part of a dialogue with our kids. It's a weird time, that our children are talking to these AI avatars. The conversations they're having with avatars are believable conversations, and feel human. So, but they're not, so at a time when their brains are developing, and maybe not able to make those clear distinctions about what is real or what is not real. So that's a very, very kind of dystopian kind of thing, which worries the hell out of me. But at the same time, as I developed that show, I realized that there were an awful lot of things, an awful lot of benefits, with a couple of drops in there that were toxic. But we really have to kind of, to understand that, we're going to have to kind of go along with the kids, go along with their, on their journey. So we have to be part of that. And I think the best way of doing that is through stories. We're a story-driven species, and if we can find the right stories to intersect into that, in the way I try to do with Alva's World, then, we have some hope of keeping pace with how our kids are engaging with technology and the potential sort of threats and risks in there.
One of the things that I find so troubling, I guess, about some of the AI art is some of the inherent biases that are built into them. If in the past, if you've looked at things like comparing male and female images are much more likely to be sexualized. There are racial components. If you ask certain prompts in things like Midjourney, DALL-E, that you get with one race that you don't necessarily see on another race. And so you have these issues baked in that, Andrew, you were talking at the beginning, where all of these things come back to a robot and an algorithm. But actually, a lot of these things come from just some of the awful biases that people share online, shrouded in anonymity. And we kind of need to raise awareness of maybe these tools aren't as free from the human touch as perhaps you might assume at the beginning.
There's actually this ad campaign on in Ireland at the moment for EPIC, which is the Museum of Emigration. And Ireland, for better or for worse, has exported more people than nearly any other country. We had the famine 150 years ago, and more than half the population. A lot of people went to the US, Australia, UK, everywhere else. And when they went there, they were kind of an underclass. And so they were represented in a way that was this sort of, subhuman sort of representation through illustration and through comics and cartoons. And when they put in "Show Me an Irishman" into AI, and I didn't say which AI it was, it gave a very kind of polished looking image of that exact bias. So it was this guy with red hair and a sort of pugnacious jaw, his fists up like this, and a snarl on his face. What it did was encapsulated what people thought when they were conditioned by bias. And the AI is conditioned by exactly the same biases. And so this ancient kind of prejudice, which is like something, melting out of the permafrost, has just gone straight into the AI. This subhumans are a representation of a class of people or a nation of people. But I think it's really, really important that there's some level of curation going on. There's some level of human interaction, so that these biases don't get through. Because as Shannon said, like, impressionable minds are going to type in, show me an Irish person, show me whatever, show me a black person or a person of color, somebody from a different world than I'm from, and it's going to spit out that same bias. And that is a worrying thing, really.
We've talked a lot about so many different things: AI, Web3, bias, tech, animation. We're not going to be able to put a definitive solution around this, I guess, today. There's no nice, pretty bow we can tie onto it. But I do appreciate you both sitting down with me, trying to tackle some of these issues, particularly when some of these things are barely present in the animated space right now. They're kind of just now creeping into our conversations. So I massively, massively appreciate you both sharing your thoughts. Before we go, though, I want to hear what's happening with both of your studios. Shannon, should we start with you? What's happening with Daily Madness?
We are currently in the middle of production on our series called Goat Girl. That's something that was co-created and it's being co-showrun by myself and Christina Yee. We're making that for Warner Discovery, EMEA, and Kika. We will be pitching in a couple weeks at Cartoon Forum, a new series called Fluff and Fury. And I believe at the end of this year, the second batch of our episodes, we have a preschool series called Ray of Sunshine, and the second batch of episodes will be airing in the coming, before the end of the year on RTE. That's what we have going on right now.
Fluff and Fury, what a great name. I love that. Andrew, what about you with Cavalier? What's going on there?
Yeah, at Cavalier, we're in the middle of season 3 of Boy, Girl, Dog, Cat, Mouse, Cheese with Watch Next Media and Cloudco Entertainment. That's been an amazing journey for us over the last 5 years, working with great partners. And the show was, you can see it just about anywhere, I think, at this point. We've got another production in-house that I can't talk about, but, ask me in a year and I'll be singing it from the rooftops. And we're currently, we're moving some properties off the development slate into production. But we've also brought in 2 people on the development team, Alan Keane, who's the Emmy-nominated writer associated with Gumball and Oddbods and other shows like that, and Ger Weber, who's coming to us from Brown Bag, who's worked on as a producer on a lot of their recent productions. So we have a great little unit going on at the moment. We've skipped Cartoon Forum this year to focus on our slate, so we should start launching the first of those new properties, I want to say February of next year at Kidscreen, but don't quote me on it.
Brilliant. I'm not going to be sending you emails saying, hang on a second, where was the slate? It's January. What's going on, Andrew? But thank you both so much. I massively appreciate it. It's been a lovely, lovely chatting with you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.